We now approach a more controversial area, that of human decisions. Does God bring about our decisions? Some of them? Any of them? We must face the fact that our decisions are not independent of God, and therefore that our definition of freedom must somehow be consistent with God's sovereignty over the human will. In our survey of the history of redemption, we saw that God brought about the free decisions of certain people, such as Joseph's brothers, Genesis 45, 5-8, Cyrus, Isaiah 44:28, and Judas, Luke 22:22, as well as Acts 2, Acts 3, Acts 4, and 13. So we should not be prejudiced by the unbiblical but popular notion that God never foreordains our free decisions. Furthermore, we have seen that God ordains the events of nature and the events of our daily life. How can such pervasive divine involvement in our life not profoundly influence our decisions? It is God who has made us inside and out. To make us who we are, He must control our heredity. So He has given us the parents we have, and their parents and their parents. And to give us our parents, God had to control many of their free decisions, such as the free decisions of Jeremiah's parents to marry, and those of their parents, grandparents, etc. Moreover, we have seen that God has placed us in our environment, in the situations that require us to make decisions. He decides how long we shall live, and who brings about our successes and failures, even though such events usually depend on our free decisions, in addition to outside factors. Negatively, God's purposes exclude many free decisions that would otherwise be possible. Since God had planned to bring Joseph to Egypt, his brothers were, in an important sense, not free to kill him, although at one point they planned to do so. Nor could Goliath have killed David, nor could Jeremiah have died in the womb, nor could the Roman soldiers have broken Jesus' legs when he hung on the cross, for God's prophets had declared otherwise. But over and above these inferences, Scripture teaches directly that God brings about our free decisions. He does not foreordain merely what happens to us, as we have seen, but also what we choose to do. The root of human decision is the heart. Jesus says, "No good tree bears bad fruit, nor does a bad tree bear good fruit. Each tree is recognized by its own fruit. People do not pick figs from thorn bushes, or grapes from briars. The good man brings good things out of the good stored up in his heart, and the evil man brings evil things out of the evil stored up in his heart. For out of the overflow of his heart his mouth speaks." Luke 6:43-45. A thorn bush cannot bear figs, because that would be contrary to its very nature. So the heart is the center of human life, our fundamental nature and character, but that heart is under God's control. The king's heart is in the hand of the Lord. He directs it like a watercourse, wherever he pleases. Proverbs 21:1. Certainly this is what God did with Cyrus, as we have seen. It is also what he did with the Pharaoh of the Exodus, Romans 9:17. Cross-reference Exodus 9:16 and 14:4, as we shall see in the next section. God directs the heart not only of kings but of all people, Psalm 33:15. So he controls the decisions not only of Pharaoh but also of the Egyptian people, giving them a favorable disposition toward Israel, Exodus 12:36. Scripture underscores that this change was the Lord's work, for it mentions that God had predicted it in his meeting with Moses at the burning bush, 3:21 and 22. God not only forms the purposes of our heart, but also decides the steps we will take to carry out those purposes. In his heart a man plans his course, but the Lord determines his steps. According to many scripture passages, God controls our free decisions and attitudes, often predicting those decisions far in advance. He declared that when the Israelites went up to Jerusalem for the annual feasts, the enemy nations would not covet their land. Exodus 34:24. God was saying that he would control the minds and hearts of these pagan peoples so that they will not cause trouble for Israel at those times. When Gideon led his tiny army against the Midianite camp, the Lord caused the men throughout the camp to turn on each other with their swords. Judges 7:22. During the exile, God caused a chief Babylonian official to show favor and sympathy to Daniel. Daniel 1:9. After the exile, the Lord filled Israel with joy by changing the attitude of the king of Assyria. Ezra 6:22. The soldiers at Jesus' crucifixion freely decided not to tear Jesus' garments, but instead to cast lots for it. But God had foreordained this decision. This happened that the scripture might be fulfilled, which said, "They divided my garments among them, and cast lots for my clothing." John 19:24. John's point is not only that God knew in advance what would happen, but rather that the event took place so that scripture might be fulfilled. Whose intention was it to fulfill scripture through this event? It was not the intent of the soldiers, but the intent of God, the primary cause of their decision. The gospel tells us over and over again that things happen so that scripture may be fulfilled. Many of those events involve free decisions of human beings. In some cases, human beings, such as Jesus himself, in 4:12-16, Matthew, may have consciously intended to fulfill scripture. In other cases, they either had no such intention or did not even know they were fulfilling scripture. Matthew 21, Matthew 26, and Acts 13. In any case, scripture must be fulfilled. Mark 14:49. The picture given to us by this large group of passages is that God's purpose stands behind the free decisions of human beings. Often God tells us, sometimes long before the event, what a human being will freely decide to do. But the point is not merely that God has advanced knowledge of an event, but that he is fulfilling his own purpose through that event. That divine purpose imparts a certain necessity to the human decision to bring about the predicted event.